there. And I remember I had one uncle that stood out amongst all the family members in that little small town. His name was Samuel Lee Temple. Samuel Lee Temple. Just a mass of a man, stood about 7 foot tall. The biggest, baddest, loudest man in the town was my uncle, Samuel Lee Temple. Everybody feared this man. Though he was kind and friendly to his family, he'd fight you at the drop of a hat. Loved to fight. I remember I'd walk through the town with him, and before long, I picked up on the fact that everybody was afraid of my uncle. Because they'd be pointing. They called him Little Sam. There's Little Sam. There's Little Sam. And before long, they start saying, there's his nephew. There's his nephew. So even when I'd walk the town without my Uncle Sam, I'd still walk like I was big and bad. That's right. I'm Little Sam's nephew. But I remember how he would gather me and my cousins together, and he would always try to teach us how to defend ourselves and take care of ourselves. And he'd say, boys, if you ever get into an altercation with somebody and it looks like they may endanger your life, he said, if you follow the steps that I give you, I can show you how to disable that person and without taking their life, but you can defend yourself. There'd be many times he'd take us over across the railroad tracks into the field next to my grandmother's, and he would show us how to use artillery and shoot guns, and he was a marksman when it came to shooting artillery and weapons, and he could shoot a field mouse as it ran across the field. But the one thing about my Uncle Sam was he was an alcoholic. Constantly drinking all the time. I think I never saw him at a sober place in his life 2 days in a row. Nicest guy you'd want to meet. He'd give you the shirt off his back. But always drunk. Many times when I was there with my grandmother, and this is the grandmother that I'm always talking about, the one who prayed me into the kingdom and many of my family members into the kingdom. And I couldn't figure out why wasn't Uncle Sam in the kingdom? We'd always get calls at midnight, 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. He's passed over, strung out in a ditch. As he drank himself in a stupor all night long. As time went on, he was out at a club in Houston, Texas several years ago with his brothers and some of his friends, and they were drinking and partying, and all of a sudden they noticed he had trouble trying to catch his breath. Had trouble breathing, and they put him in the back seat of the car, and they were driving to the hospital because his breathing was getting so bad and so difficult. And before they could reach the hospital, my Uncle Samuel Lee Temple died in the back seat of that car. Had a massive heart attack at the age of about 45. By the time they got him to the doctor, to the hospital, the ER doctor said, there's nothing we can do. He's already gone. Every major organ in his body had exploded. That's how massive his heart attack was. As time went on, we had the funeral, and friends came from all over. Family members came from all over. We had the funeral, and that was the end of my Uncle Sam. Years later, I had a conversation with my mother as we were reflecting back just on the good times and family. And the one family member that we talked about the most was Uncle Sam. I said, Mom, I just can't figure it out. I said, his mother was a devout Christian and loved God with all her heart. I said, why didn't he ever give his life to Christ? Why did alcohol have such a grasp on Samuel Lee Temple? And my mother started telling me a story that I'd never heard, and it kind of brought me to an understanding of my uncle. She said he was not always an alcoholic, and he was not always the meanest, biggest, baddest guy in town. In fact, at one time in his life, he served in the army. He's a military man. Served his country well. It was during the Vietnam War where many of the soldiers were getting their next assignment. Getting their marching orders to go to the next location and the next place. And when it came time for my Uncle Sam to get his marching orders for his next, he allowed fear to grip him to the point of exhaustion. He was so afraid that his next was going to ship him to a place that he did not desire to go. He thought his next was going to put him in Vietnam. And this began to torment his mind day in and day out. He'd call his siblings, my mother, on the phone and pray for me, pray for me. I'm so afraid and I don't want to go to Vietnam. The shocker of this story, my Uncle Sam never even opened up his orders to see his next assignment. Fear had gripped him so much that he made a decision to go AWOL, and he ran away from the army. They caught up with him several months later. He served some jail time, and right before they gave him a dishonorable discharge, they brought him in as he stood before these generals and men that respected him so highly. He said, Samuel Lee Temple, this grieves us so much. And we regret what we're having to do right now, because we recognize the skill and the talent and the ability on the inside of you. And it grieves us to the point of not even understanding why you didn't open up and see what you're next. To my Uncle Sam's amazement, as he opened up his next, as he stood there before those generals, and he began to read his next to himself, it broke him down on the inside as he saw his next was not to go to Vietnam. But because of the fear that plagued his mind and the fear that surrounded him, and as he responded to that fear and left what could have been, heartbroken, he read that his next assignment was not to go to Nam, but they were sending him to Washington, D.C. to train military men on how to become marksmen so that they could serve and protect and defend their country. He missed out on his next because of the fear on the inside of him. They said your nation, your country was depending on you. So I think about the video that we just shown and honoring those that gave their life and even recognizing veterans. If he would have just responded in faith, Pastor Randy, maybe we'd be recognize him today. Maybe he would be the ones to raise his hands and says, yes, I'm a veteran. But fear changed his course forever. I'm here to tell you today, there's a nation depending on you and I. There's a coworker depending on you and I. There's a family member depending on you and I. There's broken people all around us depending on you and I to look fear in the face and say, come hell or high water, I'm stepping over into my next. And I'm going to be the person that God has destined me to be. Come on, somebody. Come on. You are empowered to walk into your next. Stand up with me in the house today.